O me, O life, of the questions of these recurring, of the endless trains of the faithless, of cities filled with the foolish, of myself forever reproaching myself, for who more foolish than I, and who more faithless, of eyes that vainly crave the light, of the objects mean, of the struggle ever renewed, of the poor results of all, of the plodding and sordid crowds I see around me, of the empty and useless years of the rest, with the rest me intertwined. The question, O me, so sad recurring, what good amid these, O me, O life? Answer, that you are here, that life exists and identity, that the powerful play goes on, and you may contribute a verse.
Hey everyone, welcome back to Solacene. This is the 14th episode in our storytelling series, and today we're going to be talking about the story of the Solacene, feminism, and the history of actors.
Yeah, we are recording in what I would call a new studio today, and it's very hot. So again, if we sound sweaty, that's why.
Yeah, it also might be noisy, but we're gonna work through it. It's gonna be good.
Right.
Before we jump into it, you can follow us on YouTube if you're into the YouTubes, and subscribe if you're watching on there. And also feel free to follow us on whatever platform you're on. We also have a zine, which comes out with each semester. There's going to be one coming out in a few weeks, so stay tuned for that. And finally, we have Field Notes, which is a weekly letter that you can receive. If you'd like to do that, there's a Google form down below. You can sign up in.
Articulate.
Thank you. I need to get into the rhythm, I think.
It's nice that you mentioned the zine, because our first edition of the zine, which corresponded with the degrowth semester, actually included a poem by Walt Whitman, I believe.
Mm-hmm.
And that is also who opened this episode. Unfortunately, I did not write that O Me, O Life poem, because Walt Whitman is my answer to the first question of today, which is kind of like, if the Solacene was a story, who would you want to tell it? So we've been toying around with doing a kind of storytelling biographical episode and how to phrase it, and some kind of Rushmore of storytellers for the Solacene, or who would be kind of a foundational artist of the Solacene. I think this is the nicest way of putting it. I went with the American poet Whitman. What do you know about him?
I don't know much about him besides that the dark academics love him.
Oh yeah.
And in Dead Poets Society, they frequently reference him.
Right. Oh, Captain, my Captain.
Yes.
That's a nice movie, though, right?
It's a really great movie.
So it's a good place to start, and also it's almost that time of year again.
It is. Aaron's getting a little bit fallish.
Yeah.
He's has an eye towards the plaids, an eye towards the browns and the corduroys.
I feel like some people have the pumpkin spice season.
Yeah.
But for me, it's the Dead Poets season.
Mm-hmm.
But also, it's not just funny because it's out of character with the rest of the year for me.
Mm-hmm.
It's just like the opposite of my person, my character. So that's why I think it's just like a weird change that happens.
Yeah.
It's like animals that migrate or something like that.
Yes.
So, Mr. Whitman, he was born in 1819. He died in 1892. He lived mainly around the east coast of America, like Long Island, Brooklyn, places like that. Except he also toured the American frontier and wrote a lot of poems about that.
Nice.
During the Civil War, he went and lived in Washington, D.C. and cared for the wounded in hospitals.
Mm-hmm.
So his poems, some of them have like a Civil War theming, and a lot of them, I would just say most of them, have a real heartbeat of America feeling.
Okay.
I had a couple quotes. One of them, "He is America."
Oh.
And the other one by Ralph Waldo Emerson, he said that Whitman's first kind of self-published collection of poems called Leaves of Grass is the most extraordinary piece of wit and wisdom that America has yet contributed.
Wow.
So I like that. It's this sense of this is the New World's contribution to an ancient tradition of poetry and of the canon. And something initially that I think is relevant for the Solacene with regards to Whitman is that he, from what I can tell, had this self-awareness the whole time of himself in the place of a lineage of great poets, great authors, great storytellers. And indeed, actually reading about him, he had quite the ego, considering himself basically like this messianic figure of poetry, which is quite funny, but that's beside the point. the reason I chose him to be the storyteller for the Solacene is that he tends to find beauty in the everyday quite a lot, and also in nature. And I would call his poems first and foremost really like feeling poems and sensual, and they have just a really great manner of depicting the rush of wind across a landscape or a mountain. You know, that's why I'm talking about the frontier. He was very much on the borders, I think, of like the new civilization and the wilderness, which we've talked a little bit before. Frontier mindset, the frontier conception of the universe, I guess, or of life in general, is something that should be present in the Solacene, because I think it's something that humans have missed a lot since industrialization or so.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for sure. I went a very similar route with my answer, so I'm glad that we're on the same page here, because it's always interesting to see when we have a question about how we conceptualize the Solacene, if we might differ, if we might converge on some ideas.
True, it's true.
Yeah. Anything else about Whitman?
Yeah, so he was known as the father of free verse.
Oh.
He didn't invent it, but he contributed a lot, and his poems, I think, really show just the beauty of natural language rather than having to force it into a template. I love rhyming poems, and I love structure and stanzas and different forms and things like this, but also I find when I write, most often it just resembles prose more so, or nice sounding prose, so I like that Whitman was kind of a progenitor for that. And also, I was thinking about that idea of like, he embodies America, or he's really American. And I was like, that's kind of weird for me to say that as a Solacene storyteller, because we haven't really, it's not like a national thing, it's a time-based thing, not a place. But, and I was like, maybe I could just brush that aside or say, well, Whitman, except for this, but this really is the whole of Whitman. So I was like, what are some nice comparisons or some nice analogs I can find? And I think that the idea of early America, which is what he embodies, or in the 1800s, like the nice ideas that it was at least superficially, some might say today, built on, and that united the country in the fabric of it, I think is also nice ideas that could do the same for the Solacene.
Yeah, I mean, like, theoretically, it could be everyone's welcome. It's all about trying to create the best society possible. It's just and free, and everyone's happy and content and well. Obviously didn't come to pass, but I do like the idea that it can be used as an inspiration to reappropriate it or whatever to the Solacene.
Yeah. I mean, when I think about like Whitman, the images that come to mind are like a wide open, like Yellowstone National Park or something like that. It's just like real
texture.
Yeah, texture, I guess. But
tactility.
But yeah, tactility, but also natural first and foremost. It's a rugged landscape is what I see. Yeah,
for sure. When I picture the Solacene, I picture a lot of new technology and economic systems and political systems. Like, it's going to be a lot of new things, but the heart of it is just trying to be more like nature, trying to mimic nature almost in its harmony and in its peace and in its self-regulating systems and everything. So I also went in that direction and chose two. I chose two because I couldn't really decide.
Okay.
So I chose two authors / scientists who I thought would tell the story really well. So I chose Robin Wall Kimmerer and Mary Oliver. So Robin Wall Kimmerer is bringing us the Organism of the Week.
What? Organism 9 minutes in? This is crazy.
Sweetgrass.
Yeah.
So you can describe it.
It looks like very minimalist. It's probably one of our most minimalist organisms so far. A hunk of celery with some green fingers on one end.
Or you could just say a blade of grass.
But it's
so... But it's gone to seed.
Yeah, okay, sure.
Yeah, so sweetgrass kind of just looks like long, broadleaf grass. And yeah, Robin Wall Kimmerer kind of came to fame through her book, Braiding Sweetgrass, which is one of my favorite books of all time. But she was first and foremost a biologist in study. And so you think you're going to read this book written by a biologist. You expect it to be very academic. However, that's what the whole book is about, is how when she decided she wanted to be a biologist, it came from a spiritual and aesthetic perspective from her indigenous tradition. And she was like, well, it just makes sense that these two things go together because they're beautiful, or they work together in medicine, or they work together in food, like the three sisters, whatever it may be. And she took a very aesthetic and beautiful and natural approach to then learning about the sciences, to then learning about psychology, to then almost justifying things that have just been universally known or ancient wisdom for a long time. And I really like that. Back to the sweetgrass, it's an aromatic herb native to northern Eurasia and North America, considered sacred in many indigenous peoples in Canada and the United States of America. Also used in making beverages.
Ooh.
Interesting. It has a sweet scent, as you can imagine, based on the name.
Yeah.
And it's able to grow in the Arctic Circle.
Ooh, not many things grow there.
No. And finally, it repels mosquitoes, which I think is cool.
I did know that.
I didn't know that. Today, I learned something new. Aaron just knew that. Pretty cool. So, back to my people. The reason that I picked these two is because they both traveled a lot across North America, and they were able to find threads of story throughout so many different places. Like, they both lived probably both coasts of North America. Like, they've lived all over, but they find these threads of story. And when I picture the Solacene, it's like every town, every like small community is going to have its own systems that work for them. It's not all going to be the exact same, because that would be like, that wouldn't work if we tried to mandate every area has to be like this. So when we're telling the story of it, we need to try and find a way to find the thread that will link together all the parts of the Solacene despite their differences.
Mm-hmm.
And it also will be very metaphorical. So that's why I picked Mary Oliver, not just Robin, because Mary Oliver, throughout her career, has become more and more Hemingway-esque. She's gotten more and more concise. So when she started writing, she had these very flowery poems. She's a poet. And then over time, she got more and more concise, but her poems have never lost their weight. So she's really honed her craft of using metaphors to convey emotion and also convey stories, facts about places, because she really gets fascinated in different ecological systems, and then she tries to put them into poems. And I just think in the Solacene, it will be very much a balance between the scientific, the aesthetic, and the spiritual. And I think these two do that very well.
Nice. A mosaic, kind of depicting like this mosaic of different narratives intertwined with a healthy respect for nature, scientific respect even.
Yeah.
Cool. Next question, just a small one, is we each kind of featured a feminist story that we wanted to talk about. I kind of said on last week's episode, yeah, let's talk about feminism in storytelling next week.
That would just be a whole semester in itself.
Yeah,
probably.
That's the thing. I think we didn't want to intrude on any future plans, and also would have made today a rather crowded episode. We've been quite busy. I think that would have been a lot of preparation. So we just had a little segment, which is probably not doing the topic justice, but at least we can say we covered it a little bit.
Yeah, for sure.
So the feminist story that I want to talk about is called Herland, Herland, and it was written in 1915. It's a very short book by Charlotte Perkins Gilman, and I read this about maybe a year and a half ago or 2 years ago. And the reason I read it is not because I wanted to read feminist literature, but because it is often cited as like utopian literature, which is something that we're really interested in. Obviously, Solacene is relevant to that. And it's about three men who, I think they're Americans, they go exploring in the jungle. I think it's rather vague about exactly where it is, because it's a lot more of a metaphorical story than it is like a real fantasy.
Mm-hmm.
But they basically discover this completely secluded, isolated society that is all women.
Mm-hmm.
And it has been like this for many generations because there was basically just some narrative magic that allowed them to keep reproducing without men.
Mm-hmm.
And they come in with a lot of, once they learn about this, obviously they're initially disbelieving, but also they are very skeptical about how such a society would function because they think that men are crucial to society and culture and all this stuff, and they think there's going to be a lot of infighting. And I had a quote actually about just like the misconceptions that the three main characters had. Read this from the book.
Okay. He's referencing the book. He's opening it. He's turning the page.
He's crinkling the pages. So it says, and we had been cocksure as to the inevitable limitations, the faults and vices of a lot of women. We had expected them to be given over to what we called feminine vanity, frills and furbelows, and we found they had evolved a costume more perfect than the Chinese dress, richly beautiful when so desired, always useful, of unfailing dignity and good taste. We had expected a dull, submissive monotony, and found a daring social inventiveness far beyond our own, and a mechanical and scientific development fully equal to ours. We had expected pettiness, and found a social consciousness beside which our nations look like quarreling children, feeble-minded ones at that. We had expected jealousy, and found a broad sisterly affection, a fair-minded intelligence to which we could produce no parallel. We had expected hysteria, and found a standard of health and vigour, a calmness of temper, to which the habit of profanity, for instance, was impossible to explain. We tried it. And the book is, as that quote kind of implies, a first-person narrative about the guy of the three who's probably the most, understanding over the course of the narrative, whereas there's one his name's Terry, I think, is just a outright misogynist, and there's one who's just kind of just along for the ride. But this guy starts, I think he was the scientist, so he starts with the scientific curiosity, and eventually, as his questions are answered by the women who are, in a way, keeping them captive, but in a way just keeping them, period, he comes around to it. And I don't think the book is perfect. I think it's a little bit flawed, I think, because it portrays utopia, but there are other conflating factors to the fact that it's all women. There's also the fact that it's completely isolated, which I think would be rather good in terms of weeding out bad things over the course of societies and perfecting rather than expanding. The thing is that they couldn't really expand, and there were no other people to war with and things like this. So
you just have to turn the attention inwards.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So I don't think it's perfect from that sense, but it challenged notions that I had, which is pretty much all you can ask for from literature. Especially challenged notions I didn't really know I had, but found the male characters iterating. Yeah, I was just thinking about that because I was trying to ask myself feminist literature or stories with deliberate social activism themes, a deliberate purpose when they're written. I was what makes these good? And the best way I can, when they're good, that is, what can make them good? The best way I could put it was that, for instance, good feminist literature stories aren't separate from good literature. They're just good literature that might have these certain themes. And that goes for everything, I think. Because you can call them stories for change or stories that try to invoke change in the society or whatever. But I think that all good stories do that, period. However innocuous it may seem, if it's a good story, it will probably at least try to inspire some kind of change. So a movie as small as what we saw the other night, Moonrise Kingdom, Wes Anderson, it's it doesn't seem as serious or kind of socially conscious as something like Herland be, but also it will at least try to inspire you to be kinder, more loving, gentler, nice things, basically. Childlike. It doesn't have as its theme gender parity, but it does have as its theme nice things that it wishes to inspire in people, which would improve the world. So it's kind of I think every story is a story for change. So I think we actually do certain of those more socially conscious themed works a bit of a disservice when we lump them in a separate box, because then it makes them seem they're separate from, well, here's the main art and here's the library books or whatever. Yeah,
for sure. That's a really good point, because when I was looking at stories, the first one that came to mind was basically a nonfiction book that I had read, and I was well, I probably shouldn't do this because it is, as you said, separate. And then I went back to try and find some stories that I liked that I thought were a bit more, that I just liked for the sake of them, and they happened to be very feminist. And so my first one that I was going to recommend anyway is just, well, the author, her name's Lucy Peach, and she wrote a book called Period Queen, which I found very enlightening. I read it as like a 22-year-old, and I was like, wow, learning new things, really important about how women are in the world. And she's a comedian, so it's like entertaining, but it's also super well researched because she's also a sex educator. And I was like, I like this. And then I was like, that's not really a story, despite the fact that her comedy definitely is narrative, because most comedians are. So she has a show. It's more of like a sketch comedy thing. So check that out if that's your thing. But then I went back to the canon and said, what are my favorite stories that are feminist? And the first one that came to mind was Kiki's Delivery Service, but I feel like we've talked about that to death over the years. So I'll just leave that there. I just feel like it depicts all the elements of womanhood very well, coming of age. It shows all the ages. It's like young girl all the way up to an older woman, and I really like that. And then my two favorites, Portrait of a Lady on Fire and Persepolis. So Portrait of a Lady on Fire is mainly known for the movie, and then Persepolis I think is mainly known for the graphic novel. It's all I've ever read. I didn't watch the movie, but those both depict, they're very coming of age. Persepolis is set during a revolution, and the main character is like coming of age amongst a lot of turmoil. And then Portrait of a Lady on Fire is very similar to Herland. It's, in the end, it's kind of like you realize there's not a man on screen besides the very beginning and very end.
Okay.
And it's like all these women on an island kind of taking care of each other and learning about themselves, learning about how society might perhaps disadvantage them because they're women. It's set in the 1800s, so different time period, but still relevant themes. Yeah. Those are my shoutouts for today.
What do you think about the all-female Ghostbusters reboot? Feminist work?
I think... Do you want me to... Okay. I think it's like, yeah, there has to be a conscious effort to include women, to include people of color, to include different people in stories. But when it's just almost explicitly to make money, the way that I feel like it was in Ghostbusters, to be like, oh, girl power. Because you can always tell based on the reaction. Like, if a story is put out and it's like, there's a genuinely, like, the feminists uptake it as like a, oh, this is really cool, we should share this, we should watch this together. But like, no feminist group that meets on a university campus was like, let's get together and watch Ghostbusters. Because it didn't bring anything to the table.
Well, I think it's back to what I said about it can't be separate from, like in movies, it can't be separate, like, here are the good movies and here are the feminist ones.
Yeah.
It's like, it has to first and foremost be well made or well written, well filmed, whatever. And then it's almost incidental in a lot of people's eyes if it's all women, kind of.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Also, I mean, this is probably played to death, but like, you can't just put women in men's roles and be like, oh, we're so feminist.
Opening the can of worms today.
You know what I mean? It's like, we can't just, like, that's literally what the Ghostbusters is a good example. It's like, well, we cast women in these roles that were traditionally for men. Look at us go. But it's like, that's fine to an extent. Like, I really liked Tomb Raider. I liked, what's that movie called? Ocean's, the one with the women.
Oh yeah, I don't know the name of that.
Ocean's 11.
I think it is just called Ocean's 11.
Yeah. Like, that was really good. I really liked that one. And then it was kind of just like women recast in men's roles, but it was done in a way that was not just, oh, these are also moms, so they have an extra layer. It was good. So I think it depends on the film. Ghostbusters didn't really do that for me.
I can't speak on this. If I speak, I am in trouble. Next question was about the role of actors, performers through history today, and how it will be in the Solacene. I wanted to open with a quote from Nicolas Cage. He says, "I don't act. I feel and I imagine and I channel."
Wow.
And that's a good starting point because I wanted to go all the way back to shamanism.
Okay.
Goes all the way back to the very beginning of humans, most likely. I learned a lot about this in my ancient and medieval theater class. We kind of traced the lineage of acting from, as the teacher asserted, shamanism all the way to today in Hollywood and everything. And it was really fascinating to me, the intersection of religious performativity and storytelling. And I think, like, it sounds kind of insensitive or offensive, because I think people view the word performance as very, like, a negative thing.
Yeah,
like,
as if it's mocking. Or,
yeah, like, oh, so they're lying, or like, oh, so it's just pretending. I don't think performance is just pretending. That's why I was open with the Nicolas Cage quote.
Yeah, I think it can be very reverent. I mean, you've mentioned Moonrise Kingdom, and that there's the whole Noah's Ark play, and it's like, they're not making fun of it. They're in a church. They're telling the story of Noah's Ark. They might be dressed up as animals, which is kind of funny and entertaining, but it's still just communicating. Yeah. So
with the shamans, who I'm going to just describe as charismatic mediators.
Okay.
Because often, I know this is very reductive, but often they would kind of solve problems for their people and things like this. And they had access to the spirit world, and others would often watch eagerly and see what they would retrieve, see what they would bring back. And I think that's similar to the way we all sit down and watch actors on a screen or on a stage as a bridge between us and something transcendent. Also, often there was a whole communal theatre around the performance. So, like, people would be dancing, chanting, singing to invoke this state of
openness.
Yeah, sure, openness.
Yeah. That's really fun. Like, I didn't know much about theater history. You probably know more than me because of your course history. But my first thought when I was trying to figure out the role of actors in society, I was like, they facilitate emotional and sometimes spiritual experiences in a way that we don't have on a daily basis, but you can sit down for a movie or go to a play and literally come away a changed person. One of my friends once said when they watched Silence, you know that movie? They were like, I believed, for that was 2.5 hours, because it was just such a
religious experience
of watching that film. And it's like, there's so many things that these people have the power to, like, change society, and it's cool that that's kind of its roots, is like, as facilitators of
spiritual change.
Yeah.
I was kind of put on this track by Shia LaBeouf, infamous you love him or you hate him, because I think he recently converted to Catholicism or something like that, at least for a role, kind of immersed himself in it. And he did this long interview with a priest, an archbishop, something like that. Excuse my ignorance there. But he actually said to the person interviewing him, like, yeah, it was performative. And he didn't take it as offensive. He said, yeah, it is performative. But as I say, that doesn't mean we're just lying or making everything up. It means that you are playing out rituals. Like, it's ritualistic is another way of putting it. As in, there are things that you are scripted for you. You do them. It's like that. And there can be religious significance within that, is kind of the whole point. Moving on from there, I wanted to talk about these certain types of plays called morality plays, which were big in medieval times, especially in England, in which characters are presented as, like, personified virtues or sins.
Yeah.
So literally the play will be populated by goodness, charity, selfishness, greed, lust, like all these types of things, and they'll be warring. And there'll be a protagonist, like there's one play called Mankind.
Okay.
So the protagonist is Mankind, and he's trying to navigate all these different influences. And usually what would happen, they're very Christian themed, is that the protagonist would be kind of redeemed at the end. They'd go through a journey, like a Christian journey, and then at the end they'd be redeemed. And often they would kind of lecture the audience into also repenting or whatever it may be. And I thought these were really funny because today, such a common refrain at the movies is, we don't want to be preached at. Don't do anything like that. But it's like, I think stories have always been for preaching. Yeah,
that's what stories are. They're to, like, make it understandable to our minds. I feel like we're on a very Christian theme today, but, like, that's why Jesus was so prolific, because he would use
the parables.
Yeah.
I remember also that for this assignment in my ancient medieval theatre class, I had to write, what was it? A scene from a morality play, or I chose to. Do you remember what I wrote about?
I don't remember.
The main character, I think, was youth.
Okay.
And the people that he was vying against was Instagram, Amazon, and I want to say YouTube. It was like 3 different personifications of the internet. and they would go into a cave and like try and tempt him and things like this.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, that was really funny.
Yeah, that is a very Aaron moral that you want to get across. Preserve the youth.
Yeah.
Ward off the evil spirits of the tube.
The only thing more Aaron than me would have been if I had had a character called Solacene and he'd been plugging his podcast and everything.
Yeah. I love that. So all throughout this history, because as I said, you know more, I was thinking a bit about how actors are always physically separated from humans.
Yeah.
From the audience.
No, there was this quote actually, I think it was from a Tom Stoppard play, where he said, we're the opposite of humans, we're actors.
Yeah. But I was thinking that a lot. I'm like, because all throughout history, actors have been set apart. And it's like, that doesn't make sense. No other job is so set apart besides, obviously, like religious leaders are very set apart. But it's just like, why are they so different? And I was thinking, last week we talked about creativity and like what makes a creative person. And it's like people who are so oozing creativity have a very different mindset and different way that their brain functions. They're way more open. They're usually at the cutting edge of progress. That's why I feel like more artistic people tend towards like more liberal views or at least progressive views. And I think, yeah, their brains might work different, which is kind of cool. And yeah, back to the physical separation, because I was thinking a bit about the Solacene, which we'll get to more so, but it was just like, will they be as separate in the Solacene? And I think they still will be. Maybe not such a celebrity kind of...
That's the thing. I think, as we say, it's natural that they're a little bit of a separate class. Mm-hmm. But why does it have to be separated by wealth? That's such a big gap is a question.
Yeah. I was also thinking about in the Solacene, there might be like a middle class of actors. So there'll be like perhaps the ones that are on screen. Like there's really no way to bridge the gap between a screen and a viewer for the most part, unless you have someone giving a presentation, but that's still not going to be the actors. Mm-hmm. But I think the middle class of actors, what I mean by that is just like more localized theater, smaller scale film production, people that you can actually know and meet, and like it's just smaller because it's like I think there would still be, as we know, the Solacene Hollywood, so like these films will probably spread all over.
Yeah.
I'm not against that, but they'll also be much more local because right now there's not really a local theater scene. There might be one, but it's very niche. It'll be a bit more commonplace.
Let's talk about theater kids.
We're going there. Would you consider yourself a theater kid?
Certainly not.
No?
I'm the opposite of a theater kid.
Yeah.
I don't know how else to put that.
You're a math kid.
Oh.
Calculator kid.
Yeah.
Calculator kid.
I'm definitely... The thing is, I didn't discover my poetic soul until I was well into my teens. So I think I missed the formative theatre kid years in which they... it probably needs to be early that they be looked at.
Yeah.
I mean, physically get observed.
Yeah, on stage. Yeah. They have less stage fright. They get more comfortable.
Now I'm like all sheepish.
Yeah, makes sense. Because I feel like the thing with theater kids is perhaps they start so young that they never actually develop that fear.
Yeah, exactly.
So it's like people who perhaps start later in life, they get over the fear, but they're not the same. There's a different essence.
So what we're saying is that everyone in the Solacene will be a theatre kid? All the kids?
I'm actually not against that.
But here's what I think, though. If everyone was a theatre kid, no one would be. And so they would, no offense to theatre kids, but they wouldn't have this sense of self-importance. And also the sense of, like, you know what I'm talking about. There is a sense of superiority within, like, a lot of subcultures have it, but theatre kids have it. I've seen it firsthand. And also there wouldn't be this slight disingenuousness sometimes, which you feel like they're hamming it up because they know they're the theatre kids, so they have to be like a little bit obnoxious with it. Yeah. Again, no offense, but people will be more free, which also means that the theatre kids can sometimes just stand still.
Oh my goodness.
Without singing in line at the cafeteria or something.
Oh my goodness. I feel like it's funny because you and I have both kind of dabbled in the theater kid genre of being. Like, I was in theater, you were in theater at different points in our lives, and it's just kind of funny because we started later, so it's like, yeah, we have that. We're very self-aware.
Well, you didn't start later. I thought you...
I mean, I did ballet.
Oh, yeah.
Which we'd put on plays, but ballet is...
So would you call yourself a theatre kid?
I don't think I'll ever...
You don't have the essence.
I don't have the essence.
You could have been one.
I could have been
Your
one.
resume.
Yeah, my resume.
Shrub?
I was never a shrub.
Who were you? Duck?
I was a cat.
Yeah.
I was a little boy. I was a gypsy boy. I was just always cast as...
And a demon.
I was a demon. I've been a lot of things. I was a cook. I was a mermaid. Yeah. So, I mean, I kind of have the theater kid essence in me, but they always just were so much cooler than I was.
Yeah.
Like, I love theater kids and kind of wish I had become one. Maybe someday.
Well, what it is, I think it's an envy for their unerring confidence and creativity.
Yeah.
And that's something that can be the template for the Solacene kids. And then I want to talk a little bit about today's fame and culture and how in the Solacene we'll be dismantling that with regards to actors. So why is it there? I thought about perhaps there's a correlation with the fact that we went from seeing people on a stage, usually quite small because we'll be sitting near the back, to faces, giant faces blown up on a screen, and we kind of worship them.
Yeah.
In a way. At least we're all sitting really low, and there's this face really big blown up like in Citizen Kane or something like that. And because of this, I think many actors today are less actors and more models. They're more chosen because they look nice.
Yeah.
And in the Solacene, I mean, this is unavoidable because film is a visual medium, but I think there will be maybe a little bit more of a push towards, let's not just have the pretty faces now, let's actually try and say something. And therefore, let's not just cycle the same 100 actors over and over. Let's have a little bit more variety in here. And I was also thinking that there's a certain mystery around acting right now. It's like, how do they do it?
Yeah.
I could never do that. But, they present these emotions in a way that I certainly don't. Also, I think it's a weird filtering down where everyone's acting now on TikTok, right, or whatever. It's like those TikToks where people film themselves crying. Yeah. It's like, well, you're not in a movie.
Yeah.
But it's a weird way that it's kind of changed our brain. But I think that there could be a little bit. The mystery is always going to be there a little bit, as you said, always has been. But we could maybe have people appreciate the art form more by promoting local theatre and, as we say, having everyone be a theatre kid. Kind of, maybe then they would worship actors a little bit less. I don't know. And also I was thinking more transparency with the other people working on the movie. Especially
I think so, yeah.
the writers and the directors. Because, like, if you think about, I don't know, Fight Club, you think about Brad Pitt, and he's espousing all these virtues of masculinity or whatever, and you're probably misunderstanding what the point of the movie is. But Brad Pitt didn't actually write those words. He's just saying them. He's just like, not just, but he's the vessel. He's channeling the spirit of the character, and he's presenting it to you, but he's channeling it from a script that was written by someone else whose name we probably don't know. Yeah,
making screenplays a lot more commonplace.
That'd be kind of cool.
Yeah, I think that'd be neat. The way that we read plays in school, we can read screenplays in school just the same. Yeah, that's important. I always wish I knew more about cinematography, lighting, just like things that it would be interesting to know about, but there's really no way to learn because those people aren't documented, I suppose.
Well, today they are quite a lot, but they're not pushed by media so much. But it's changing. But I think that all those, or various of those elements, are just as important to that religious or life-changing experience we were talking about in a story, as is the actor portraying it well. Like, the cinematography matters quite a lot, and you can have lasting images. The score matters a ton. And musicians aren't really worshipped in the way that actors are, musicians for film, that is.
Yeah.
So, yeah, just different ways of talking about
the
movies.
Performances. Yeah.
And I think it's funny because in plays, we kind of do center the writer a little bit more than we do in film.
I mean, even at the end of plays, they always clap to the lighting, clap to the orchestra, clap to the person in the wings. Like, they're... Because, I guess...
Whereas in film, when you look at credits, it's the name of the actors usually that comes first.
Yeah, for sure. Wow. This is very inspiring to me. I feel like my brain's kind of going really fast. One thing that I was thinking, considering the Solacene, is, like, there won't be so many parasocial relationships because we'll have more real relationships. So I feel like the reason that celebrity has gotten to the point that we're obsessed with what people are doing in their free time, what their house looks like, what they're wearing, is because we don't have that in our neighborhoods, because it's like challenging to do that because people are so alienated. So I think in the Solacene, it'll be a bit more, you can just be a bit more concerned about what's happening around you.
These kind of characters in our real life.
Yeah.
So instead of being like, oh, there's that really there's that jerk who's always talking about fighting and stuff.
Yeah.
In Fight Club, like, instead of that being a character, we just know that guy from across the street or whatever.
Yeah.
We don't really like him. never watched a shout, but that's beside the point.
Yeah.
I don't know why Fight Club comes to mind.
It's a weird, like,
It
movie
is.
to keep referencing, but,
It is.
you know.
That's the way we do it here on Solacene. Next episode's going to be the last in the storytelling semester, so tune in to that.
Yeah, thanks for listening.
Bye.